it goes a little something like.
Hello, everybody. This is our third episode on Sumi Huddle. As I always say, Sumi Huddle, we are usually joined with people that inspire us with their work, with their commitments to social impact and impact making and change making in general. And today on Sumi Huddle, we have somebody that is really inspiring and has a really great, bright personality. I'm honored to meet her. We know her from Bloom Community, which is a social impact community. This is Natalie Sifuma. I hope I pronounced that correctly. She's a development strategist, storyteller, and climate advocate. And as the founders of Sisters in Climate, a Pan-African ecofeminist community, this is my description. I will hear about it from Natalie as well. Natalie is dedicated to amplifying women's voices, especially in climate action. Her journey from, communications to climate advocacy, I think showcases her commitment to making climate conversation and impact conversations more inclusive and accessible. And I find her journey very inspiring, and I'm excited to learn a little bit more about it today. So I wanted to start by asking, I had a little introduction about you, but I would love to hear you talk about your own self. Could you share a little bit about you and your journey that led you up to, founding the Sisters in Climate? What sort of inspired you to come up with this community, and do you think it has evolved since it first started, or do you think it will evolve in the future, so to say?
Thank you so much. So I'll begin with my name, which you pronounced correctly. My name is Natalie Sifuma. I often make a point of pronouncing it clearly, as people tend to say it differently, but that's generally how it's said. I'm an African storyteller, a development communications professional, and the founder of Sisters in Climate, basically how you introduce me. And I'm so glad to be here, Sue. Thanks for having me. Well, in as far as Sisters in Climate was born on International Women's Day on the 8th of March in 2023, and it was a community that was inspired by a gathering of women in Nairobi, which is where I'm based. We had come together to explore our role as environmental stewards, and around that time, climate conversations and policy discussions were gaining momentum across the continent. And so I had also just kind of stepped into a new role as a head of communications for a climate advocacy campaign. And as I was navigating the space, I noticed clear gaps around climate information and education, especially for women. It felt like there was this warm, urgent opportunity to create spaces that centered knowledge sharing and collaboration on climate in formats that felt both inclusive and community driven. And since then, it's 2 years, around just over 2 years now. What began as a small initiative has started to find its rhythm. What was once a baby is now learning how to walk. And we've continued to host knowledge and networking events and created climate education products from webinars to digital series that have helped expand our reach beyond Nairobi and even beyond Kenya. We've also partnered with like-minded, values-driven climate movements, which has really helped us grow our impact and continue building a truly African climate sisterhood.
That is really inspiring. I was just talking with one of our previous guests about some other issue that's obviously still connected to climate activism, about immigrancy, and how in the talks of immigrancy and forced labor, slavery, we do not always are very capable at centering the people who are within, receiving end of the impact of these changes and these challenges, basically. So I feel like communities who are affected also from climate change and climate challenges need to have a sort of bigger voice in what's happening around the world. So I feel like what you're doing in that sense is also very interesting, because climate change is a global issue, but it's also a gendered issue, right? To target that specific voice to try and empower that, I think is very valuable and it's very inspiring. I just want to say that to add to that. Yeah.
You also mentioned in climate creates this beautiful space for women to talk about climate. And you mentioned you always try to be inclusive. And we know that Africa is a big continent, so many cultures, so many different climate challenges. How do you ensure that you keep this community inclusive and how do you make sure you resonate with women from diverse backgrounds? Did you have any like specific challenges when building the community and after that sustaining it?
I think I would say a lot of our journey has been inspired by things that I experienced while working in a climate advocacy campaign, and even just in how we approach different things. So, more specifically, we prioritize inclusivity in the way we design our projects. For example, when producing our digital series featuring women in climate, we make a conscious effort to represent different geographical regions across Africa as well as a range of age groups, because diversity is not just about checking boxes, it's about reflecting the real fabric of the continent. Women young and old, women from different spaces and backgrounds as well. Right now, we're also looking into adding a linguistic dimension to our communications. Africa's linguistic diversity is rich and powerful, but navigating it requires care. So we're mindful of the complexities, especially those tied to neocolonial legacies and the ongoing conversation around how we Africanize language in meaningful, respectful ways. So it's something we're approaching thoughtfully. Of course, leading a community like this comes with its challenges. One of the biggest is balancing our ambition with limited resources. So, as a team, we're full of ideas and creative energy, but when it comes down to funding, we often have to scale back. This reflects a broader issue around access to climate finance. Our model is largely nonprofit, I would say, and community oriented, which doesn't usually fit within the traditional funding frameworks. So I do hope that, even in sharing this, it begins to, cause a shift in the system, because climate education and collaborative, inclusive engagement are just as critical to sustainable development as infrastructure or policy.
Yeah, you're very right. I think in all areas of impact, social impact and climate impact as well, we're seeing this, repercussions of this sort of funding drying up globally, especially from the US and Europe funding agencies. It's a hindrance to all of our conversations. And as to me communications, we help our partners for funding as well. We write proposals and, we're very involved with, global funding schemes. And we also can observe that it's harder and harder to make people believe in the value of what you're doing, especially as you said, the value of what you're doing is a little bit more vague than something's very, logistical and infrastructural, I guess. We also do believe in the power of storytelling, and that sort of leads me into the other question, which is, when I was looking into what you were doing, and we also discussed what we were doing before, since we know each other, place importance in storytelling as well. You worked extensively in narrative projects like Palquest Stories. I wanted to ask you about how do you see storytelling influencing climate action, and why do you think it's essential in your context in where you're working? Do you think it has any impact? What sort of challenges and like benefits storytelling skills have contributed to your work?
Yes, I light up every time I'm reminded of my days at Pauka Stories. But in essence, storytelling is deeply rooted in African culture. It predates formal education and has always been a vessel for preserving history, sharing wisdom, and instilling values across generations. While I was working at Pauqua years back, these were some of the things that informed our story projects, which ranged in media and even included a Kenyan alphabet that was inspired by our African realities and sought to instill values in children. In the context of climate and climate action, storytelling becomes a powerful tool, not just to inform, but to connect, because it can help people feel and understand what's at stake. In the case of Sisters in Climate, we use it because it also invites curiosity and informs agency by encouraging individuals to see themselves as stewards, whether it's within their families, their communities, their places of work, or even as policymakers in the making. I talk about the youth in that case. Through stories, people can reimagine what's possible. And especially for Africa, storytelling opens up a space to shape our own narratives around climate, not just from a place of urgency, but from one of vision, resilience, and hope. And I could go on and on when it comes to storytelling in Africa. That's just where I just feel warm and fuzzy, but that's the gist of it.
Yeah, I think that makes it even more impactful than, than just writing, like you said, out of urgency. You write grant proposals and project outlines, but sometimes people need to hear that story about real people who's going through some challenges because of climate change. And I think that's really, really powerful. I want to take a different angle from storytelling for my next question and ask you about a woman looking to pivot into climate work without having a necessarily traditional green background. What advice would you offer? Because in recent years, despite the irony that the funding is decreasing, but we need more sustainable focused jobs and careers. How can they leverage their existing skills to contribute meaningfully if they feel not confident, if they don't have the necessary education for that? What would you advise? And is there anything you learned from your own journey as well?
I love this question because Sisters in Climate recently launched a quarterly Zoom-based series called Work in Climate. And in this series, we spotlight African women working in different areas of climate, women who often don't come from what we call traditional green backgrounds. And so with the women that we spotlight, we allow them to share their personal journeys into climate work, showing just how diverse and nonlinear these paths can be. We held our first session in May 2025, and we'll be back with another one this August, hopefully. But back to your question, I'd say that the starting point is recognition, understanding that you already have a role to play in climate, whether by choice or simply by being part of the ecosystem. One of the speakers actually in Work in Climate said, as long as you can eat, or as long as you eat, you have a role to play in climate. And the next step from recognition is curiosity, being able and being open to explore how your academic background or personal interests might help address a gap in the climate space. That could be reading more content around climate from credible sources, that is, joining conversations, or even just speaking to people you know who already are doing the work. For me personally, my journey into climate was out of that curiosity, also that recognition. And now that I'm also in the space, I try to contribute by sharing climate content through a communicator's lens. So breaking down complex topics, highlighting different themes and subtopics, and making it easier for people to see where they might fit in.
Yeah, I think when I started to research more about climate change and activism around that, I think people don't comprehend how intersectional that is. Gender and race and everything is connected to climate change and those who are affected by it. So sharing information around that, like you said, if you eat, then you have a responsibility. I think we should create more awareness around that, 100%.
It's also very, I think, inspiring to hear you and other people who are, actively trying to make a difference in this. One of the questions that we really like asking people that we have as guests is their motivation. Because as we talked about, like this requires a lot of planning, a lot of structuring, and there's a lot of work to be done, but it's also a very emotional work, I think, in all areas of social impact, in all areas of, planetary impact. You feel a sense of like urgency and sort of gloom sometimes. And that's why this question is sort of in all of our episodes existent, which is there anything that's happening right now, either in, climate space or in any other space that you're currently passionate about, that like you really drives your motivation, or either good or bad? Maybe you're like really angry at it, that's why you're like really fired up, or it makes you feel hopeful.
Yeah, a very interesting question here. I think when it comes to Sisters in Climate, we sort of have the proof of concept there. And I would say that one of the things that maybe floats around my mind quite a bit is wondering where to find the climate funders who believe and work like ours and who are ready to back it through unrestricted grants. So we want to keep doing this, and our work is not just creating spaces for community. We're working directly with waste pickers in some of the projects that we do. So these are people on the front lines of what pollution then does, even in the context of climate. So if we can have funders or funding that allows flexibility, it's so important for community-led work, especially when you're trying to build something that's adaptive, that's people-centered and rooted in lived realities, because that's where we base a lot of our work from. I would also just add one other thing that comes to mind, because it's also been on my mind lately, and that's sustainable travel in Africa's development. For a Pan-African community like ours to truly thrive, we need to bring people together physically. So creating spaces for connection, shared learning, solidarity. But travel within the continent especially is both costly and carbon intensive. And navigating that tension is something I've been reflecting on deeply. So while I don't have all the answers, those are some of the things that, sort of scare me, but then also keep me going. And there's many other things in mind, but these two, funding that trusts and connection that's sustainable, those have been on my mind quite a bit and also fueling me to keep, looking for the solutions or the answers.
Yeah, it's nice to see different types of motivations. I think in these conversations, that's one of the takeaways that I personally have. Everybody finds their motivation and their drive to keep going in this work, which I don't think it's not an unrewarding work, but perhaps it has its rewards that are a little bit more vague. It needs some introspection to find your motivation sometimes. And it's funny to see how, different people find it. And it was really interesting to see how you sort of have this problem solving mindset, and you see something and you think that, okay, this is a little bit scary, but this is actually something that I can do something about, or I can at least strive to do something about, and that's your motivation. I think that's also very interesting. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'll keep that with me, I think.
You mentioned the program you launched in May for Working Green. Yeah, I want to ask you about what's next for Sisters in Climate. Do you have any other programs launching or collaborations, and how can our listeners stay connected to you?
Yes, we have some exciting partnerships in the pipeline. Since we're recording this in June, I'm thrilled to share that we've just finalized a partnership with the African Climate Alliance for two upcoming events in two different cities at the same time in Kenya. And that's for World Environment Day. We're also deepening a long-term collaboration with Riara University, which is one of the top law universities here in Kenya. And we hope that this collaboration will grow into a technical partnership to support new educational projects, especially those targeted at African youth, because as we know, university bring together a lot of youth. To stay connected to Sisters in Climate, I would be more than happy to invite our listeners to check out our link tree. That's linktree/Sisters in Climate. It's our central hub with the links to our website, social media, even our newsletter. And there's also a special link in there for anyone who'd like to join our WhatsApp community. And if you're feeling moved to support us, even with something small as $5 or as generous as $50, you can always reach out to us directly at hello@sistersinclimate.org. Every bit truly helps power the work that we do.
That's amazing, Natalie. Thank you. Thank you for being here with us today. It was really, really nice to hear you talk about your journey. You're really dedicated to empowering women and creating conversations around climate in Africa. We hope to see Sisters in Climate everywhere in the future. And we'll be leaving the links for your LinkedIn and also Linktree in the platforms that this episode's going to air in. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.